This is the Puck Junk Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Puck Junk Podcast. I'm Sal Berry and with me is Tim Parrish. And we are happy to be joined by Mike Phillips and Gene MacLeod of Upper Deck. Mike and Gene were the original creators of the EX2000 sports card sets that came out in the 1990s. And they've worked on some stuff for Fleer in the 90s. They've worked on some stuff for Upper Deck now, which they'll talk about. So, thank you both for joining us. How you doing today?
Doing great.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So, the first question I want to ask, of course, I want to ask about how you got started in the industry, because I think anybody who collects cards always says, "Oh, I'd love to make baseball cards. I'd love to make hockey cards, whatever." So, I'm going to ask that question. But first, I just want to know, how did you get into collecting cards as like a child or a young adult or even as an adult? Because everybody starts collecting at a different time. We always assume that people started collecting as kids. Maybe you both did. Gene, do you want to start? How did you did you have an interest in cards when you were like a kid?
Strangely enough, no. I did not collect cards growing up. My brother was a big card collector. I worked in Atlantic City. I did a lot of work using foils and die cutting and embossing and all the stuff that we started doing on cards. So when I went for my interview with Fleer, they thought, oh, this is kind of some stuff that we could use. I talked to my brother and he was like, you have to take that job. That's like the best job in the world. And so I was not really a collector. I collect a lot of things, so I know the mentality of collecting, but just not trading cards. But I lucked out taking that job because it has been the best. It's such a great industry to be in. Of course, now I love trading cards. So,
of course. And Mike, how about you? Did you get that first pack when you were 5, or was it later on in life?
I was 7.
Okay, I was close.
So pretty close. Yeah, it was. I started in the later 70s, and then the rest is kind of history. But I was a baseball card collector at heart when I was a little kid. Loved it, lived for it. My mom used to bring home a pack or two from work every day, and I would certainly look forward to that and seeing her, of course. That just kind of evolved into setting up when I always like to joke with people when kids would set up a lemonade stand on the corner, I was set up with a baseball card stand back in the day, selling cards on the corner. I'm fortunate. I've worked at every sort of level of the trading card industry. I started out doing card shows, ended up co-owning a hobby shop for a number of years. The distributor we used at the time hired me to come work there, and then that distributor ended up getting bought by Marvel, who owned Fleer, and thus is my path. Been at working on the manufacturer side of the business since 1995 when I first met Gene.
So I wanted to ask about that because you worked for a company called Hero World Distribution, and so they were the ones who got bought by Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
What did they make prior to that? I'm just curious because I used to work in a comic book store, so we used to get the Marvel cards. We used to get sports cards, but we used to get like a lot of the Marvel cards, X-Men cards, stuff like that, right around that time that you were working for that company. So I'm just curious, maybe what are some of the things that Hero World made, and then maybe what are some of the projects you worked on with Marvel?
Sure. We were a distribution company, so we really didn't make anything. We made a few things here and there, but we were predominantly a distribution company. So we dealt with all of the major comic book publishers, obviously the Marvels, the DCs, and a host of other comic book publishers. And then I worked in the division of the company that dealt in trading cards. So in addition to, first and foremost, we were supplying comic books to the comic shops, predominantly in the Northeast part of the U.S. But we were also, at the time, the largest distributor of trading cards. And we carried sports and entertainment. So I was there when the first Marvel masterpieces were coming out in the early 90s. It was a wild time. That's when the products you mentioned were really first starting to gain notoriety and become really popular. My job was really to grow that part of the business, and we became very successful at doing that. We also did a lot of TCGs. I remember Magic was sort of in its younger days back then when we first started as well. So it was a combination of all those things. And at the time, the comic book industry was going through a lot of changes, and Marvel looked at what was going on in the business, and I guess they thought it's time for us to not only distribute our comics, but own that distribution and be able to see it all the way through. So they purchased Heroes World at the time, and like I said, Marvel had just come off of purchasing Fleer, and right about when I started at Fleer was right around the same time where the purchase of Skybox went through as well. So there was a lot of upheaval in the industry, a lot of changes, and it was a wild time, but definitely an interesting experience for sure.
Getting back to Eugene, I'm curious, like, what are some of the sets in the 90s when you were with Fleer, Skybox, that whole thing, because they kept changing their name, Skybox
Yeah.
International, Fleer Corp. But I can't keep track of all of the name changes. But what are like some of the sets that maybe we would remember or that you are particularly fond of? And we would probably remember the ones that you're fond of too, but I'm just curious.
Yeah. Probably the first major set that I worked on. I mean, I worked on a lot of sets, but the first main set that I worked on was Flair. They were coming out with a high-end super premium set, our first super premium set. I have a lot of fondness for that set because it was getting in from the ground floor. Like Ultra was already a set that had come out for 1 year when I started. Flair was already a set that existed. Flair was the first set that I designed from the ground up. And we really had a lot of fun with that, putting in thicker cards and putting in a really cool, nice coating to it and playing with the packaging and really trying to make it a super premium set. So that was the first set. I mean, my favorite set that I worked on was probably Metal Universe, because that set, just working with all the illustrators, we were owned by Marvel at that point, and I really wanted to kind of do some of the stuff that they were doing in our Marvel division, which was colorful and fun. And so I really tried to bring that to the sports side of it. Oh, EX. I loved working on EX. The first set, which we're talking about now, I loved. And then growing that to change a little bit over the years, which was a lot of fun to work on.
I'm glad you brought up Flair, Flair, and the packaging, because for those who don't know, the Flair cards, they came in this like two-part box packaging where it was like a top piece and a bottom piece, and the top piece would like slide over it.
Yeah.
And then you would like wrap the cellophane around it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really nice. I mean, it was like these cards weren't wrapped in just paper or foil, they were wrapped in cardboard, so that kept them really nice.
Yeah.
They almost kind of reminded me, like, not that I like smoking, I don't smoke, but my dad used to smoke the really good cigarettes that came in like those nice hard cartons that had like the lid that like flipped up, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it kind of reminded me of that, but like in a good way, and it kept them nice. And I mean, like, I'm a nerd. I even save wrappers and box tops going back as far as I can remember. And for the Flair, like, I saved those, but I just put like those blank decoys in there to like keep my Flair wrappers nice, and like, I don't want them to get squished,
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a cool idea. I mean, that was like really like you were buying a premium brand of hockey cards.
The card stock was so thick, I don't remember
Yeah.
anything coming out at that point
Yeah.
that had card stock that was like that. I mean, you're talking super thick.
Well, if you remember that time period, it was an interesting time period in the industry because Topps had come out with Topps Finest, and that blew everybody away. Like, what is this? Upper Deck answer with SP, and Fleer needed to answer with something, right? So Flair was the next one that came out. It was such a cool time in the industry because everyone was getting pushed to be better and do something different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, Sal, you mentioned that packaging, and I'm sure Gene remembers. We actually used to refer to it as like the cigarette box, or like that type of packaging, because it was different and cool. But unfortunately, budgets were way different back then, and you didn't have to account for autographs and game used material and all that other stuff in the pack, so you could spend a lot more on packaging. I know Gene misses those days.
I do. I love that packaging.
Gene was a wizard when it came to packaging.
Because I also had an illustrator do the box for that, like I wanted it to look like a woodcut, and I had that done, and just all those details. That's what I love working on.
And that's the interesting thing about stuff like that is people forget that there's more to the cards than just the cards themselves. There's the packaging, there's the wrappers, there's, the ads that go out.
Yeah.
I mean, so many advertisements in magazines and the sell sheets that got sent to the dealers and the stand-ups for the countertops.
Yeah.
In the 90s, those were crazy designs for some of those.
I know.
And I think Fleer and Skybox and those brands always had the most wild and crazy things that you didn't see.
Yeah.
You'd get a Topps box that was just plain colored, or a Pro Set hockey box. It's just black and it says Pro Set on it.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to do the plastic EX box, but that was very expensive. That box was ridiculous. The original EX 2000 box.
Basketball.
It was it was plastic. It was actually plastic. Because I wanted people to know that the base card, like I wanted you to be able to pop that up, see the base card, see through it, just like the base card would be. And I think it was worth it for the first couple we did it, and then we wound up switching to paper just because it was expensive, and I don't think it held up very well sometimes.
Right.
So,
Now,
yeah.
I want to bring up Metal Universe, because that is like one of my all-time favorite hockey sets. Like, it's so ridiculous, over the top. I mean, we did a whole episode where we just talked about Metal Universe, and then I write for the Hockey News as well. And our latest issue was the 90s issue. So I did an article, like the 5 most 90s sets ever. And of course, I had a set of Pogs, because you can't get more 90s than the Canada Games Pogs.
I saw the eye roll.
Right.
I saw that.
Still, you know what I mean? And like, you look at like the original like Upper Deck SPX set that was die cut and had holograms and had like a super thick premium card stock. I mean, it was just like they threw every gimmick they could at that. And then there was another one that I mentioned, like at the top of the article, was the Skybox Metal Universe, or excuse me, was it Fleer Metal Universe back then? Because it felt very Marvel. And, you had the superhero comics were huge in the 90s. I mean, they really took off in like the early 90s. And so by like the mid 90s, it kind of made sense that, yeah, all right, it had this inspiration. It felt very superhero like, but it also makes sense considering that Fleer was owned by Marvel, and it might also previously worked for a company that, dealt with the comic book distribution. So how did that come about? Was it just like, hey, let's just make the hockey players like superheroes and do crazy stuff, like put like cybernetic attachments on Steve Eiserman and have Curtis Joseph fending off a swarm of flying eyeballs? I mean, it's just that's like my favorite card. It's like so just ridiculous, over the top. All right, I'll stop. I'll hang up and listen.
Well, in that set, like I said, we had a division that did all of our entertainment cards. And so we didn't interact all that much because they were actually on a completely different floor. But a lot of times they would want to be using the technologies that we had just used on a set, or they wanted the same kind of design. But I would see their stuff and be like, oh, it's so colorful and fun. And so I said, well, how, can we have access to some of these illustrators to do some fun backgrounds for us? And they were like, yeah. So they gave me a list of like 10 illustrators. And what I did was I had the player outlined. So there was no background behind them. I mean, it was expensive to get all those illustrations done. So we tried to use each illustration twice. I would pair up photos that looked very similar, like stance, the way they were standing, or maybe 2 goalies or whatever. And I would send that to the illustrator, and I'd say, like, do whatever you want. Like, look at the way that they're standing or what they're doing, and envision them in a whole different background. and they would send me sketches, and then I would either make changes or approve it, and then they would go to the person that would then colorize the illustrations. So it was the illustrators that really came up with the fun concepts for the backgrounds.
You had to sign off on it, though, I'm sure, so you can take credit.
Yeah. I mean, it was my concept to use them, but, not everybody loved that set when it first came out. I mean, they would see some of these things and be like, "What the heck? Why is that bee chasing, somebody?" Or, "Why are they in the Grand Canyon?" Like, it was bizarre, but to me, we had sets that were serious or sets that were really expensive, and we always talked about wanting to have kids in the hobby. So to me, that was a great way to get kids involved, or like you were saying, people who were really into Marvel, or it was a good crossover. That's the way I thought of it.
Yeah, anytime you can branch out like that to other, areas of collectibles and bring people in,
Yeah.
the better.
Yeah.
Because you never know who you're going to spur on to, become a collector at that point, just
Yeah.
because of the design or because of what they're getting, as a product goes. That's one thing I've always appreciated about Fleer products. And you mentioned, Gene, that not everybody liked that product.
Yeah.
We've encountered collectors over the years all the time that say, "Oh, that's like the worst. It's the most gimmicky. It's this, that, and the other."
Yeah.
But every single year, every card manufacturer will put out that one product that may not be for everybody.
Yeah.
It might be the let's reach over here and pull in and see what we can get, and that's the fun stuff.
Yeah.
That time period was really when there was starting to be an influx of brands, and I always get asked like about high end brands, like you're pricing out most people. Well, I mean, if you think about life, you have a variety of choices for different types of products. We all can't afford all of them. They're not all for us. And I think that was the start of the time in the industry where the manufacturers had so many products that they were starting to have to put out that not every brand was going to be for every collector. And, which was hard. There was a time period there where completionists and player collectors, that was when they were first starting to get a bit frustrated because there were so many different choices and it was almost impossible to be a completionist anymore. Well, in this case, you have brands for different types of collectors, and not everybody's going to like everything. So collectors, that was the first time they really started to have to make choices and say, okay, maybe I don't want to buy that brand, but I'm going to buy these brands. These are more for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the end, it's the best of both worlds because you have choices versus having to buy just one or two different things and that's it. Now you had a wide menu of things that you could choose from, and it gave collectors more choices. So, and that's ultimately where we are today with so many different brands and products. They're not for everybody, but you can pick and choose the ones you enjoy to collect.
Exactly. And we have plenty of sets that are very traditional, and if that's what you like, then you probably are not going to like metal. But,
Probably not.
people who were young at that time always write to me and say, like, I loved that set. So I think we achieved our goal.
Could you guys imagine if there was social media back then?
Oh my
Holy
gosh.
cow.
No.
There are a lot of reasons I'm glad there wasn't.
Yeah. Not
just for the manufacturing of and design of trading cards, but for many other reasons. But yeah. Just the vitriol that goes on now when new products come out. I just imagine, you kind of go out of the box a little bit on things and try to spice it up, and people lose their minds over it.
We had to go to card shows to get feedback.
Yeah.
And set up a table and show people, a couple choices of different designs and things like that. That seems like archaic compared to today when you can just put something online and get feedback in 30 seconds.
I wish it was still like that.
Yeah.
Where you had to be in person and see those things.
Yeah.
But,
that's just me.
Yeah.
My favorite set, or one of my favorites, was definitely the Metal Universe. But then there was another set called Skybox E-Motion. I don't know if it was E-Motion or E-Motion, one word.
Yeah.
And I don't think that got carried over to the other sports. Was there a baseball emotion set? I do remember hockey. Oh, there was baseball.
Yeah,
Okay.
There was baseball, yeah.
Baseball and there was a basketball.
That was already happening at Skybox before we purchased them. So
Gotcha. Okay.
Emotion was just about to come out. So when
Mhm.
we purchased them, that stuff started showing up at the office, boxes of that. And we were like, oh, so kind of EX kind of evolved from Emotion.
Oh, well, okay. How did that happen?
Well, we kind of merged Emotion and there was another, what was the other one, Mike? There was another,
Yeah, well, it was EXL.
oh, EXL.
Yeah, I was going to say EXL came out the year before in the basketball brand.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then that went, and then Emotion, and then, there were some elements I think that both Gene and I really liked from that, from a design standpoint and a content standpoint. I'm not a huge fan of the sayings on each card or I guess they were the emotions. That was another polarizing thing, like not
Yeah.
for me, but some other
Yeah.
people may have liked that. But there were some pretty cool design elements that I know Gene really liked, and I thought as a collector, were pretty cool. And when we went into, working on the X2000, the goal was to take the best elements of that and evolve it into something new.
Yeah. I mean, the EXL, yeah, that was also coming out at that time, and that had the dual level product. So, yeah, I guess the EX really evolved from that.
So with the EX2000 design that came out the following year, basically you kind of took the Skyview inserts
Hmm.
from the previous year and turned those into the base cards, more or less.
Yeah, and then really like flash them up. Like, of
Yeah.
course, we
Oh
always
yeah,
had
absolutely. With the foil and all
yeah,
that.
all the
Yeah.
foils and the etchings
Yeah.
and yeah.
Was that the first time, other than that Skyview set, was that the first time that you kind of exclusively, not exclusively, but mainly used the acetate as an insert portion of the card? Because I know it's been done numerous times since. I don't recall seeing anything prior to that.
Not a two level. We did acetate cards, but not like a dual
Yeah,
level.
I meant
Yeah,
both,
no.
having the paper and the, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Because it makes like that window. It's really cool.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Very difficult process
oh,
that,
I
I
bet.
mean, there's terminology that Gene would know much better than I would, but, one of the challenges was the registration. You had the front and the back, and, that wasn't always on point on a lot of the cards, and they would move around when they were being cut. And there were a lot of challenges to that design that most people may not realize or recognize. But back then, it was pretty groundbreaking. It was pretty groundbreaking, and I think both Gene and I kind of knew it. When we were working on that this was going to be something pretty different, pretty special, and there were challenges. I
Yeah.
mean, Gene
Especially
and I
for a
were
baseball.
reminiscing. Yeah, we were reminiscing the other day about some of the meetings we had when we got finished product and we first opened it, and it was not good. There were from a quality standpoint, and there was a lot of stress. What do we do with this? What do we do? And the I won't get into the details, but I mentioned the registration, and there were a lot of damages and chipping, and which are still, most people see that today. I mean, the challenges in getting a Kobe rookie in a high grade are tough.
Right.
So there were a lot of things that went into that, but when all was said and done, we believe that it was something unique enough that even with the condition challenges and things like that, it was worth putting out. Gene, I don't know if you remember any other details from those stressful days.
Was that the set that we had to heat in order to cut it?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Because I
Wow.
mean, you have paper and then you have the layer of acetate in the middle, and they wanted to shatter or they wanted to delaminate and to this day, like I am shocked at how well they have held out up. Like since we relieved all those issues in the beginning, I feel like those cards have held up pretty well. I don't hear of delamination. I have a bunch. I don't have any issues with them. So
What Gene was referring to was when they were cutting the sheets. From what I remember, the room had to be like 100 degrees so that the
Holy cow.
plastic would soften, so that the blades would cut it and not splinter the plastic. And so imagine working on that in a plant at 100 degrees. cutting these things down. That was just one of many adventures around it.
Yeah.
How different is the process now than it was then?
So when I first started here, they said this was a product that they were going to issue. Mike had already had this in his mind that it was the set that never happened, like
Yeah.
we had basketball, football, baseball, but this now we could kind of complete all the sports. And so I was excited about that. But a lot of the artisans that did stuff like that, because every one of those are die cut. If you look around the players' hands, that's difficult. And now we have sticks. So a lot of those artisans have gone away because we don't print as much as we used to as a society. A lot of things have gone digital. And so a lot of the stuff that was easier to do back then, I'm shocked at how hard some of that stuff is. I thought it would be, oh, here we are 25 years later. It should be like a breeze. It's not.
Right.
So it is very similar to the way that it was done. We're trying to keep it as authentic to the original. So, yeah, it's very similar to the way it was back then.
So Upper Deck is billing it as the set that never was. So what happened? There was EX for baseball, basketball, and football, at least one set for each of them.
Mm-hmm.
How come hockey never got the EX set originally? Like what happened? Because it's finally coming out and it's using like either the design from 96 or inspired by 96.
Yeah, so back then that was the brand that I conceived and Gene designed. So at the time, we were full into basketballs first, baseball, and then football. But during that time, I had built hockey. The set was put together, the checklist was done, and I even mentioned to a few people, we had John LeClaire ready to be on the box cover. He was one of our spokesmen at the time. Gene and I are both born and raised Philly.
Yeah.
We were excited about that. And that was all done. Gene had already started working on the designs. The inserts were already named and picked out. Everything was done. And for whatever reason, and I don't recall what it was, we no longer had our hockey license. And when that happened, we weren't far enough along in the production process to put it out. So it never happened. It was technically built, in terms of the construction of the inserts, the names, everything else, designs that Gene and her team had worked on. Everything was ready except for the production, and we were never able to put it out. So it just never came to be.
Was there ever a prototype or anything manufactured?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
No, and at that point, people knew because it would have been the fourth one. Promo cards, which is why we don't do them anymore, are very expensive to do. But back then, promo cards were done for almost every product, which was great.
Yeah.
But everything was so new then. First time ever doing this or that. So you really needed a promo card to get across what the card was going to be like ultimately, rather than just seeing it printed in a brochure. But unfortunately, we never did a mock-up or a prototype, at least a physical one.
For basketball, we did.
Those are always the things I find interesting when the prototypes hit the market.
We did oversized 8x10s for basketball as a promo.
Oh, wow.
At that time. We did. We spent some money on promos.
You always see when those hit the secondary market, when somebody somewhere found them in the garbage or whatever, and they were never supposed to be released, and they somehow get out.
Yeah.
When was it decided to bring EX back for this year?
Before I came to physically work here, I was contracted, like we said. And he had come to me a few times before that and said, I always wanted to do that EX 2000 set. That hockey set is like in the back of his mind. He had, like he said, he had gotten so far along with it that he was like, now we have the hockey license. This is crazy that we've never done it. So I think in his mind, he's been, Mike, right? Like you've had this in your mind for years.
It was something I've always wanted to do. And as particularly as we got through COVID and people were going back and nostalgia was hitting everybody so hard, and people were going back and really appreciating things or looking for things that maybe they couldn't afford, or they that remind them of when they were younger. and so many of those brands from the 90s really just exploded. And with where we are today, meaning Upper Deck, as a company, we're so known for hockey, and we have these brands, and we really work in various Fleer brands and Skybox brands throughout what we do today, whether it be sports or entertainment. Uh, it just made so much sense to do this. And oh yeah, by the way, we had the designer of the original one coming back to work with us. I mean, it was just too perfect to not do it. And then the final thing that really kind of pushed us over the edge was having a set like that, having a generational rookie come along that can really drive it, and have something that you already know people are going to collect based on that. And now you put this iconic brand and design behind it. It just made too much sense. So, all of those things together pushed us to do it.
You were, of course, talking about Brock Faber, by the way, right? when you meant generational rookie.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So will the cards be the for this year, the hockey cards, will they also be see through like those? Have like see through elements?
Yep. They'll be exactly like the basketball cards, because once we got to baseball, we started changing the clouds. Some of them were sunrises, and
Hmm.
I went back to the basketball because I feel like that's the one that everybody thinks of. And we went to clouds again. So just everything will be the blue and white clouds. I mean, there's variations within the clouds, but yeah.
And what are some of the inserts that you're excited about for this set? So I understand that the set is 150 cards. That's 100 veterans, 50 rookie cards. That sound about right. Rookies are going to be one in every other pack. 2 cards per pack. Ouch.
Just like the original.
Yeah, that's the way the original.
Yeah.
Paying homage.
Yeah.
Just the price is a little different.
Yeah.
Like everything else today, it costs a little more to make.
Well, yeah. I mean, and back then, like SPX was like 1 card per pack, and like Power Deck. I was a big fan of Power Deck, but I don't think you guys worked on that because that would have been late '90s Upper Deck. But anyway, so like, what are some of the getting back to my original question? What are like some of the inserts that? Oh, you got
he's
one.
got Power Deck.
Oh, is that
Jack
a
of all
baseball?
trades here.
Did you pull that out of your CD-ROM drive?
Yeah. So like, what are some of the inserts that you're excited about, or think that fans will be really excited about?
Whole or Nothing was one of the inserts from baseball.
Great name.
And so we're doing a Whole or Nothing here, but it's based off of that, but it has its own look. And I always really liked that original card. So I'm happy to be seeing that. It's a die cut acetate like the original was.
There are a few, there are a few coming back. I mean, I'm thrilled to have Gene working on the base card because I have all the faith in the world in our design team at Upper Deck, but having Gene be there to know the sort of the ingredients that make it authentic to the original was really key. And then, of course, the credentials and the essential credentials parallels,
Yeah.
and doing a couple of additional sort of spins on those. I'm really excited to see that as well. And then, we're doing a couple that, I loved back from when we were working on the other sports were net assets, which obviously makes a whole lot of sense from the basketball, but it translates great to hockey, and with certainly with goaltenders. And then we did one in here called Generation EX, which is sort of like on the technology wise similar, I guess, Gene, right, to Jambalaya.
Yes.
And I think we're using lenticular stock for that.
Yeah.
So there'll be some homage to the Jambalaya era of the late '90s as well. So really, really cool little touches, new spin. One thing Gene and I talk about a lot, and as a designer, I know Gene believes in this very strongly, is it's really important to pay homage to the past, but it's even more important to have these designs progress and modernize and change, and not always just rely on things that were older, but do newly imagined versions of things and have these designs sort of progress with time. And I think this product really does that.
Yeah, I think the base card will be very familiar to the original, and then the inserts, yeah, like Mike was saying, will have their own spin on maybe an old theme, which I like.
One that I can say I really liked, and you'll have to explain where this came from or where you came up with the design for it. But the double helix, the ones that are going to be case hits,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I didn't.
that's a crazy looking card.
That's a designer on my team. I'm really, yeah, he did a great job with it.
Yeah. I wish they weren't just case hits. I wish
Yeah,
they were like maybe
I
one a
know.
box. But
Some of those
yeah,
cards I never even get to see. Like Mike and I, we used to get sets of everything if they weren't numbered. But now, if we open a box and we happen to hit one, that's when we see it. Or I'll see it online. Or I'll have to buy one.
that's interesting.
It's going to be a really cool mix of different technologies. Like I said, pays homage to the past, but also moves it into the future. So it should have a little bit of something for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a move back towards that. I mean, like you said, with the pandemic and a lot of people getting back into like the 90s era stuff, especially like that mid to late 90s when you started getting with like you said earlier, like it was almost like an arms race where they did foil, so then they did foil and they had to do holograms and then they did holograms. And so like everybody was trying to like out cool each other. And you look at like
Mhm.
how like those like PMG red like Michael Jordan cards shot up in value. Well, all of the PMGs. Jordan is just probably an outlier because he's such a popular
Yeah.
player, but that's the one that always makes the headline. Like PMG Jordan,
Yeah.
rated PSA 9 sells for 5 figures or whatever, right? And you're just like, wow, really? This card, I probably have one. Well, not really, but everybody thinks they have one, but so yeah, so there's definitely like this movement back where like people are kind of like, yeah, the jerseys are nice. Yeah, the autographs are always nice. And yeah, there's going to be some autographs in your set as well. But now there's kind of like that kind of desire for more foil and more of like, I don't want to say gimmicks, but more of those design tropes from the 90s
Yeah.
because they were really cool and eye-catching back then, and they're still cool and eye-catching today. And I think it's exciting. I'm afraid to find out what a pack is going to cost, what a box is going to cost, and how many I'm going to need to try to put together a set. But it just sounds like right up my alley with like that crazy 90ness that I just have never let go of.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy it's going in that direction. Because in the late 90s, when I left in the early 2000s, that's what happened. It was like you were not going to have any money for anything fun anymore. It's all going to be autos, it's going to be memorabilia, but that stuff is all finite. Like you don't want to flood the market with autographs either, right? Or so we can have a lot of fun with the technology and the look of the card and the scarcity of a card that looks just great in your hand.
Well, speaking of autos, I see that it's not guaranteed one per box, but there's about 4 per case, is what my understanding was reading the sell sheets on them. Stickers, on card, little both. Do we know yet?
I'm 99% sure these are hard signed. They're coming out late in the year. I'm not positive, but usually our later season products typically are our hard signed products. And autographics, even though in some of the iterations we did, like in the Fleer retro sets and some of the other sports, there were stickers. Autographics originally obviously was hard signed. In this product in 96, 97 was hard signed. So I'm guessing that's the goal, but I don't know that for sure.
I have to ask the question because some people
Oh,
care,
I
some
know.
people don't. It's one of those
Absolutely.
sticking points, no pun intended,
Yep.
for some people.
And when you're paying, when you're
Yeah,
paying good money for a pack of
right.
cards, hard signed is generally what we try to deliver. But certainly later in the season, we want to get the product out. Ideally, while it may not be in the actual season, but trying for the calendar year,
Right.
or it's getting everything hard signed. Obviously, takes a lot more time. So,
Absolutely.
but we'll do our best.
Well, that raises the other question: redemptions or no redemptions?
Too early to tell.
Okay.
I think, that we go down and push this thing as far as we can from a timing standpoint before you got to get the cards. They got to get mixed and they got to go to get packed out. So you extend that window as long as you possibly can without having to push the release date out. So you look at a lot of different factors before you make that decision. We have been working extra hard to get back on track. All the manufacturers were knocked off kilter from the pandemic, closures of printing facilities and production companies, and then, of course, this explosive growth in the industry has really been a challenge from a production standpoint. And every year, every company is getting more and more back on track. So it's really important, for us as a company to get our releases back on track, from a timing standpoint. So it's a very delicate balance between timing and not wanting redemptions. And no one dislikes redemptions more than us as a manufacturer. I know collectors don't like them, obviously, but we certainly don't like to put them in there. Sometimes they're necessary, but they're very costly for the manufacturer as well to fulfill them. There's a lot that goes into that. So there's a whole lot of reasons that they're not good. So we do everything we can to try to avoid them, but sometimes there's just nothing we can do. So long story short, to answer your question, I'm hopeful very minimal. That's always the goal, and we'll know that probably in a couple months.
And that's why I asked, because I know Upper Deck's gotten really good over the last couple of years about trying to cut it way back as far as what's out there. And I know the later releases tend to not have them as much. So that's why I wanted to throw that out there. And I do agree, and we've had other people tell us that manufacturers hate them way more than collectors do because they're even more work. Especially if you have to chase and chase and chase, and no one ever answers the call when they originally signed the contract.
And I don't need to tell you guys how international a sport hockey is. So we've
Absolutely.
literally had to canvas the globe in chasing guys down. And you'd think a lot of times during the off season would be easiest to get things back, but it's a long season. Players just want to get away and not think about the game or signing or doing anything during their free time. So it becomes a lot even more challenging to get them like now. Our athlete relations team is amazing. They do an unbelievable job and they take it very personally and they do everything they can. They know how collectors feel and what they want. Just like the rest of us, they want to put out a product that we're all proud of, and that includes minimizing redemptions wherever we can.
Tim, I'm out of questions. You?
I
know you can always ask a million questions.
Yes. I have two left.
Okay, 2. I'm counting.
So, number one of the big draws of EX 2000 was always the credentials cards. Those are the more highly sought after versions of the base cards.
Mm-hmm.
Upper Deck also has a brand called Credentials.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any question as to whether or not there would be a problem with having a standalone Credentials product and having a Credentials insert in a different product? Or was that even a discussion, or am I crazy and I'm the only one that thought of it?
No, you're not the only one who thought of it. And, it was never really a major concern because it's such a key part of this product and the history of the original release. And those cards in basketball and baseball and football from 96, 97 are more popular than ever. So they had to be in here. But when we first started building this, Credentials had already released as a hockey product and it was out there. It's it's very, very different, really. Other than the name, there's nothing else that ties the two together. And Credentials, the brand, pays more homage to tickets and actual credentials that you wear around your neck and that sort of thing. That's the theming. So when I named this Credentials back in 1996, I wasn't thinking anything than it was just sounded really cool. And there was no theming behind it. And Gene put an unbelievable design behind it and away it went. But there was really no connection to what the actual standalone brand Credentials stands for.
And I'm not going to lie, when that came out, I thought it was going to be that.
Oh,
When
really?
Credentials was first announced, I was like, oh, there's going to be a Credentials set standalone. This is going to be awesome. And then I saw it and I was like, this is something. It's not what I
It's a
thought it was going to
name
be.
tag.
Yeah. And I thought, okay, whatever. It's cool. But yeah, so and I'm glad it was included in there, because I don't know how you could do this without having that as part of the set.
And especially today with the the explosion in popularity of the parallel set. The parallels were,
Yeah.
I'd like to think that our team back at Fleer Skybox, we really pioneered the whole concept of parallels. We did the first numbered parallel that was ever done in Circa Baseball the first year, and we had no idea that that would become the norm back then. But we were trying to do some different things with parallels back then to create more value at the box level. And Credentials was just yet one of a bunch. You had, obviously you mentioned the PMGs, and you had, the rubies and skybox, and you had ultra golds and ultra platinums and things like that. Like, we were always trying to do different things with parallels. Credentials was just another one of those. And then in baseball, we did Credentials and Essential Credentials, two different ones numbered to different numbers. Back then, that was like, wow, should we do this? Like, this is like, are we sure we should do this? And now every product seemingly has endless parallels. So
Yeah.
back then it was only two, and we were kind of freaking out, and it worked. And this product will be no different with regard to today's products, where it won't just be Credentials and Essential. It'll be several different colors and iterations, and a more modern take on the original again.
Yeah. Those are going to be the ones everybody wants. The parallels, I
Oh,
think,
yeah,
in
of
that
course.
set. Yeah.
Of course. Now I have a different question, but I'm going to call this B of the other question.
Oh, so
So,
that's three
Gene,
questions now.
yeah, well, Gene, as you're designing, is that something that comes up as part of the design? Like, you know what? I want this in a blue border and a green border and a red border and an orange border. Does that come up as part of that? Is that a discussion, or does that come from somewhere else, like a marketing?
So product development just says, gives me the list and says there's going to be 5 parallels. Sometimes they have the names of all the colors that they want. They want a blue, a red. Sometimes they want us to come up with, especially if it's like maybe a patterned foil or something they want, then we'll have input into that. But we're given how many inserts, how many parallels they want.
Okay.
And the different seating ratios for each of those parallels. And so as they go up, we try to make them more and more special, or more unique, or definitely something that when you open the pack, you're like, oh, okay, this is the card I've been waiting for.
I just wondered if it was just people sitting around just naming as many colors as they can until they run out.
Yeah, there's
They
some of
said,
that.
okay, we'll take 17 of these and we'll put those on the list. And these
Yeah.
5 we're nixing because it's too hard to mix those colors. And
We've had some issues.
okay.
They want to do like orange parallel, and orange foil for some reason gives us a lot of problems. Either it chips or it doesn't want to overprint. So we're like, stop it with the orange parallel. So, stuff like that. Or to me, a black parallel, it's hard to make something like that with silver into black and make that look really unique or higher end. To me, the silver cut it. So, there's stuff like that we're always playing around with.
So that's a good segue to my second question. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. Mike brought it up. Traditionally, EX2000 was a very condition sensitive set. We see it all the way to today. It's, as we brought up, it's hard to find a Kobe rookie that's in good shape.
Mm-hmm.
It's an 8. You don't find many higher than that. And it's the same on the Allen Iverson rookie. It's the same on the Marbury. It's the same on a lot of them, just because of the printing technique and the design and how they were made. And we already talked about, is the process the same?
Yeah.
Of doing the double layer.
I see where this is going.
Have we improved the materials to the point where we can cut out maybe some of that high level condition sensitivity?
Well, I mean, we haven't done a 3-level. So this has like foil, etched foil on the front, die cut. Then we have that middle layer, and then we have the die cut on the back. And so there are still a lot of processes. Of course, I mean, I think that these should turn out exactly the way we want them to turn out, which is perfect. But I guess we'll see as we get into it. But I would say, yeah, the conditions should be better. The coatings are different than they used to be. You know, they're a little better. When you etch all the way to an edge of a card, like we do with metal, there's always kind of a sensitivity to that.
Absolutely.
And that's the way these cards are. They're etched all the way to the edge, but I guess we'll see when we get into it. Hopefully not.
I mean, I think Gene answered it great. I think one thing we learned, way back during the originals, like I was mentioning earlier from that meeting we had where there was a lot of stress. Think about all the borders on this card. Besides the standard borders, you have all the borders on the inside of the card that could be susceptible to damage. It's a 3-layer card versus most cards being 1. Look, there are a lot more opportunities. I would spin that to a positive in that I think that puts a premium on cards that grade out as a 9 or a 10. Like any other condition-sensitive product. It's not going to be the same vendor that created it back in the 90s and put it together. So there is that unknown, but we have amazing vendors that do incredible work. So like Gene, I'm confident in their ability to put out a very high-quality product. But the reality is you're still, at the end of the day, you're still dealing with blades and machinery and cutting and then, of course, not even getting into the packaging and everything else. So you just don't know. You pray and you hope that, and we do everything we can to make sure that from a quality standpoint, look, when we put out a product, we want every card to be perfect. It's just impossible to be. So we're confident in this one. But, look, even PMGs today, PMGs are famous original year for, if you get anything over a 6, it's pretty good, right? Like on the original PMGs.
Notorious chipping cards.
Yeah, and even today, and Gene can speak to this better than I can, certainly, but the nature of foil hasn't changed that much. Hollow foils, and then certainly having those cut, and Gene mentioned the nature of the foil, particularly like in products like metal, where you go to the border, it just is very susceptible no matter what you do. So we're hopeful and confident that this will be, from a condition standpoint, fantastic. But we just won't know till we see it.
See when I get there.
Fingers crossed.
That's a great answer.
Should be exciting when it comes out. Any last things you two want to add before we let you go? Any other thoughts that you just got to get out there?
I'm just excited to get this product out and finish up the 4 sports finally after 25 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am too. And I'm just, it's so cool to be able to do this with Gene after the original that we worked on. Crazy to think about, was coming up on almost 30 years ago, which is not possible.
No.
But somehow is. But, the fact that Gene and I both left Fleer around the same time, right around 2000 in that area. And here we are in 2024 working on the same product and finishing this, the final piece of the EX 2000 puzzle is pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree.
It's come full circle.
It has.
Yep.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
It's great that you guys teamed back up after all this time to be able to put this out there, because that's got to be the that one unfulfilled thing that you just never could get done, and there it is.
That's
finally.
true. Yeah, there's not that many projects that we didn't complete. This was one of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, awesome.
All
Thank
right.
you very much for your time. Appreciate it. I know our listeners do too. Thank you for being a part of our podcast.
My pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening to the Puck Junk Podcast. As always, if you've enjoyed this show, please be sure to like and subscribe. Please be sure to tell your hockey card collecting friends. If you'd like to support this podcast, you could do so by buying a shirt at shop.puckjunk.com. And if you'd like, you could subscribe to our newsletter at puckjunk.com/newsletter. And until next time, collect what you like.
For more hockey goodness, follow us on Twitter @PuckJunk.